I knew things were changing. The moment Preston dropped the word synergy, unironically, during his first all-hands meeting, that smug, two-button suit-wearing master of business administration came strutting in like he just invented capitalism. Not inherited a corner office from the man who used to call me the spine of this place. I have seen startup bros come and go, but this one had the confidence of a man who has never had to earn his parking spot. 22 years. That is how long I have been with Bancroft Tech. I joined back when our servers were held together with duct tape and hope, and our marketing team was just whoever could make a halfway decent PowerPoint presentation. I was there before we got the funding rounds, before we outgrew 2 office buildings, and long before anyone had ever heard of Preston. The founder, George Bancroft, built this company from a folding table in a rented storage unit. He used to say that processes make permanence, and I made sure every process had a paper trail, a timestamp, and a backup. When you have been somewhere long enough, you stop needing a title to know your worth. Technically, I was the chief operations liaison. Internally, I was the person you called when procurement, stalled compliance panicked, or legal forgot which version of the charter we were using. I kept the whole machine running without ever needing to raise my voice. Then George got sick. He started fading about a year ago. Quietly at first, missed meetings, forgotten names, odd silences. He still had moments of clarity, but the board got nervous, and nervous boards do stupid things. Like handing the reins over to Preston, George's wet-nosed nephew, who once asked if we could just use artificial intelligence for compliance reports. From the second Preston set foot in the office, with his polished loafers and fake humility, I knew I had a countdown running over my head. He made a speech about modernizing legacy systems while never once looking me in the eye. His eyes were usually glued to his phone, scrolling through whatever cryptocurrency clown was promising to 10 times his ego. I started noticing things. My calendar permissions got restricted. People I had mentored were suddenly copying me instead of inviting me to meetings, and I overheard him in the hallway telling human resources I had museum energy. Here is the thing about being underestimated. It gives you time. Quiet time. The kind of time where you revisit old files. Pull up those dusty documents nobody has opened since 2010, and remember every handshake that ever meant something. George and I had an understanding. He trusted me to safeguard the company's foundation, and buried in those foundations were some very old, very real clauses with very sharp teeth. But before I go full scorched earth, real quick, if you are listening and have not subscribed yet, now is your cue. Every like and subscription keeps this little engine running, and it means the world to the team working hard behind the scenes. Now, back to Preston's slow-motion car crash. I did not fight the shift. I let him replace our vendor liaison with his college fraternity brother. I watched him convert our internal wiki into a chat channel called Preston's Notes. I even smiled when he rolled out Fun Shirt Fridays. But what I also did was quietly renew my notary public license, dust off a certain 24-page document signed by George in 2011, and begin logging every interaction with human resources into a private email thread. I knew the final blow would come suddenly. Preston did not have the spine for confrontation. He was more the type to schedule a meeting at 7:30 in the morning and bring coffee like a psychopath. So I waited. And while I waited, I made sure every piece of paper he had never read was in order. Every clause he would have mocked had been verified. Every signature was notarized. I was not planning revenge. I was preserving structure, the structure he was too arrogant to understand. It happened at 7:59 in the morning on a Tuesday. Only a coward picks a time before most people have even poured their first cup of coffee. I was still locking my car in the garage when I saw the meeting invite pop up. Subject line was Quick Sync. Location was Human Resources Conference Room B, sent at 7:56 in the morning. No context, no preparation, just vibes. Preston was already there when I walked in, legs crossed, sipping some green sludge from a jar like he was in a tech cult. Human Resources Director Deirdre sat beside him like a hostage, pretending her makeup could conceal the dread in her eyes. I gave her a nod. She did not return it. Preston did not waste time. Walter, he said, like the name tasted sour in his mouth. We have been evaluating our organizational strategy, and after a lot of difficult discussions, he actually smiled here, the bastard. We have decided to sunset your role as part of our modernization initiative. Sunset, he said, like I was a failed email campaign. I blinked once. That was it. No tears, no gasps. I just tilted my head the way you do when a child proudly presents you a drawing of a dragon that is clearly just a squiggle with eyes. I did not need to hear the rest, but he gave it anyway. We really appreciate your historical contributions, he added, dragging out the word historical like I was a fossil he had found in a filing cabinet. It is important to stay relevant in today's landscape. Consider this your final lesson, he said, like he was the teacher in a startup-themed movie. I smiled tight-lipped, no teeth, no words, just nodded once, stood up, and picked up my briefcase. I just walked out. The walkout felt like the longest, slowest parade I had ever marched in, except no one clapped. They just averted their eyes like I had become contagious. The elevator ride down was blessedly empty. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing. I got into my car, shut the door, and took a deep breath. I did not scream or panic. I just opened my banking app, verified the final direct deposit of my severance paycheck, and clicked confirm. That timestamp mattered. Next stop was the office of a notary public. I had the letter already printed, sealed, and labeled for immediate review by the general counsel. All it needed was the seal. The notary public raised an eyebrow when she read the first line. But she did not ask questions. She just signed, stamped the document with blue ink, and slid it back across the desk. Then came the courier service. I had prepared the same-day delivery service 2 weeks ago, labeling the envelope as a time-sensitive legal document. The driver asked if it needed a signature on delivery. I told him yes and specified that only the general counsel, Regina Higgins, could sign for it. No human resources, no Preston, no substitutes. The driver nodded, loaded the package into his van, and drove off. I sat back in my car, which was parked outside the coffee shop across the street from the office. I did not go home immediately. I watched through the tinted windows. I saw Preston leave the building an hour later, laughing with someone from strategy. He was probably making a joke about legacy energy. What Preston did not know was that the letters now in transit contained more than just a formal farewell. It was a formal notice of termination acknowledgement, executed by the party of the second part, which was me, per Section 4.8 of the 2011 Operational Reversion Agreement. That was a clause so old that even the senior lawyers had forgotten its existence. But I had not. I helped George draft that agreement when we incorporated the company. He was paranoid back then, terrified that the board might someday be swayed by family bloodlines instead of professional competence. So, we wrote safeguards, legal tripwires, checks buried so deep they might as well have been written in invisible ink. But I kept copies in triplicate, stored in 2 secure physical locations and encrypted online. That clause stated that if I were ever terminated without unanimous board approval and proper severance in compliance with the original charter terms, operational control of Bancroft Tech would revert within 96 hours to the founder's trust and to the appointee listed therein. Preston had just pulled the pin on his own career, and the best part was that he still thought I was just historical baggage. Preston posted a graphic of a broom sweeping in the main company chat channel with the caption that spring cleaning was finally underway. Someone reacted with a fire icon, and another added clapping hands. I know this because a former colleague forwarded me the screenshot. Loyalty is a funny thing in an office. It does not always fade just because you are no longer on the payroll. From his corner office, which used to be a supply closet until he had it remodeled with mid-century modern furniture, Preston strutted around like a man who had just conquered an empire. He ordered a catered lunch for the executive team that day, celebrating my exit with a toast about removing operational friction. I was told he even pitched a new organizational chart printed in a sleek font, as if that could solve their actual coordination problems. I was not surprised. Preston had all the emotional depth of a damp paper towel. What I was counting on was his arrogance. It was the same arrogance that made him shrug off the legal memo his assistant slid onto his desk that afternoon. I imagine the conversation went something like his assistant flagging that legal had noticed something in the old governance archives about my termination, saying it might warrant a quick review. Preston probably waved it off between bites of his lunch, telling her that they had sunsetted all those old clauses years ago and to let compliance run in circles if they wanted. But we had not, because I had not let them. Every 3 years, like clockwork during our compliance audits, I ensured the reversion clause stayed active, recertified, and renotarized. I had the complete document trail to prove it. Most of the current team was not around in 2011. They did not know the founder's paranoia ran deep, and they did not know I was the one who designed the trap. To make sure everything was legally secure, I had spent the past several months reviewing our corporate history. I documented every single communication, every board resolution, and every financial transaction. I knew that in the corporate world, whoever has the best records wins. Preston was too busy posting on social media and talking about disruption to notice the quiet analyst in the corner office who was cataloging his every mistake. I had records of his unauthorized expenses, his failure to follow corporate governance rules, and his complete disregard for the company's founding charter. I was not acting out of anger. I was simply performing my job as the guardian of the company's integrity. When the time came, I would present this mountain of evidence to the board, and they would have no choice but to act. Preston thought he had won a simple victory, but he had actually initiated a process that would lead to his own removal. Meanwhile, the courier was weaving through city traffic. The envelope in his bag bore my personal seal, the same one George and I used when we filed our first state incorporation paperwork. Inside was the notarized execution notice, cross-referenced with the board charter documents, and a copy of George's trust appointment directive, which was signed and filed with the state. The language was precise. In the event that Walter Vance is involuntarily terminated without documented cause, and if said termination fails to meet the severance and board notification standards outlined in Article 7.2, then operational oversight shall revert to the founder's trust. Control shall transfer to the trust's appointed successor within 96 business hours of executed notice, barring direct board intervention with unanimous override, which shall require the founder's written assent. They had no override. George had not signed a single document in over 9 months due to his health. Preston did not know the clock was ticking. He did not know the courier was 3 blocks away when he posted a video of himself on the office balcony, with a caption about making room for innovation. He did not know that legal was already calling in a junior associate to dig through the archived physical binders, the ones no one ever looked at unless I asked them to do so. Back at my house, I did not celebrate. I did not pour a drink. I pulled out a yellow legal pad and wrote out a timeline. 7:59 in the morning was the termination. 8:41 was the notary seal. 9:02 was the courier dispatch. By 12:03 in the afternoon, it was marked as delivered and signed for by General Counsel Regina Higgins. I had a paper trail of timestamps, emails, tracking confirmations, and a recorded voicemail to my attorney, noting the event, all within the window. That evening, I received a single-line email from Regina Higgins, asking me to confirm whether I had executed the reversion clause as outlined in Article 4.8. I replied with one word, executed. I signed it with warm regards because I am a professional. Then I sat back and watched the notifications pile up on my private phone. The whispers had begun inside the office. I was not panicked yet, but it would come. They just did not know. It was already too late to stop the gears from turning. By Thursday, 2 days after my termination, Preston had already fired 3 other senior staffers. All of them had been with Bancroft Tech since the early growth years. Our VP of Vendor Relations, Bernard, was gone. The payroll systems manager, Fiona, was out. And the woman who built our client onboarding framework, Rachel, was reassigned to a minor role. That one hit me harder than I expected. Rachel had brought me soup during a bad flu season years ago, and now she was escorted out without even a goodbye email. In their place, Preston installed his college fraternity brothers. His old roommate, Hunter, who once got suspended from campus, was now our new chief strategy architect. Hunter had no background in technology or business operations. Another buddy named Dustin was installed as the head of organizational vibes. Inside sources sent me screenshots of Preston's morning messages. Legacy does not equal loyalty, he wrote to the team. We are building a future, not worshiping a past. Keep your energy clean and your ideas disruptive. Someone else captioned one of his videos, writing that this is what happens when a social media post grows legs and walks into your office. I smiled from my home office. Nothing fancy, just a window seat and a wooden desk. I sipped my dark roast coffee and watched the leaks roll in like postcards from a ship heading straight for an iceberg. The coffee was strong and bitter, a fitting accompaniment to the news I was receiving. Someone sent me a spreadsheet of projected cash flows. It still had my formulas, my color coding, and my notes in the margins. Preston had replaced the top row with a header labeling it as optimized by his new team. I knew that their incompetence would quickly show in the financial reports. Hunter could not even format a simple spreadsheet, and Dustin was too busy planning office parties to notice that our key clients were beginning to complain about delayed deliverables. The vendor relationships that Bernard had spent decades building were beginning to fall apart, and Fiona's absence was causing significant errors in our payroll systems. The entire company was beginning to slide into chaos, and Preston was completely oblivious to the danger. He believed that his startup energy and modern terminology could solve any problem, but corporate realities are not swayed by enthusiasm. I continued to document every failure, preparing the final report that would show the board how quickly the new management was destroying the value of the enterprise. Then came the human resources blunder. Late Friday afternoon, I got an alert that my online access to the company's internal portal had briefly reactivated. It was just a small window of time, but it was long enough for me to glimpse a modified file. The official termination notice was now dated Wednesday, 2 full days after Preston gave me the boot in person. They were trying to backdate the event, probably to buy time or to shift the 96-hour reversion window. They were behaving like amateurs. Here is the problem with trying to rewrite history when the historian kept the receipts. I had my timestamped direct deposit receipt, the notarized courier slip, the signed delivery confirmation, and my legal reply, all dated Tuesday. I forwarded everything to my lawyer, Evelyn Sharp. She sent back a brief reply telling me to let them make their mistakes. By Friday night, word was spreading. Someone from the product team asked my old assistant if she had a copy of the founder's charter. Another employee from legal called in sick pending document clarification. One analyst apparently told Hunter that the operational vibes were concerning after being asked to sign off on a half-baked database migration. That night, I got an email from an anonymous account. Inside was a screenshot from a company chat where Preston said that my entire job could have been done by a simple software plugin, and that they were future-proofing the business. No one responded to his message. They just left icons of blank faces. I did not reply to the sender. I just saved the image to a folder on my drive. The Monday board meeting was supposed to be routine. It was meant to be a quick check-in, with a few slide decks and some performance metrics from the new Vibes team. The kind of meeting where everyone politely nods while secretly checking their personal phones under the conference table. Instead, it turned into the quiet sound of ice cracking beneath expensive shoes. It started innocently enough. Preston kicked things off with a standing presentation, pacing back and forth as if standing made his revenue dip look intentional. He wore a designer vest and jeans, looking like he thought he was a visionary leader, though he lacked both the intellect and the simple courtesy of professional behavior. "Team," Preston said, pacing slowly. "We are shaking things up. No more institutional drag or legacy molasses. We are lean, we are mean, and we are Bancroft Tech 2.0. The board members smiled thinly. General Counsel Regina Higgins did not smile. She was flipping through a thick folder with the energy of someone looking for a hidden hazard. She paused on a page about halfway through and went completely still. Preston did not notice. He was too busy talking about vertical growth and decentralized strategies. Regina finally raised her hand. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, "but a document came in over the weekend, time-stamped, notarized, and delivered by a courier." Preston waved a hand, saying that if it was from Walter, they should ignore it. Regina did not blink. "It is not noise," she said. The room shifted and the silence became heavy. One of the external board members, a gray-haired man who had been tapping his pen, looked up. "Is this a legal issue?" he asked. Regina adjusted her glasses. "Potentially," she replied. and requested a short recess to review the validity of a clause referenced in the document. Preston scoffed, claiming they had sunsetted all the old paperwork during the last audit. Regina's voice was cold. We sunsetted the templates, Preston, not the governing documents, and this clause predates our digital archive. The board chair, a sensible woman named Miriam, leaned forward and asked how old the document was. Regina flipped the page and pointed to a signature. 2011 George Bancroft's original charter. She also pointed out that any attempt to modify or backdate employment records to avoid the consequences of the reversion clause would violate the terms of the charter and could constitute a breach of fiduciary duty. She warned the board that they could be held personally liable if they participated in or ignored such actions. The room became even quieter as the board members realized the gravity of the situation. They were not just facing an administrative dispute. They were facing a major legal crisis that could destroy their reputations and their financial standing. Preston tried to speak, but Miriam silenced him with a single look, stating that they would take the recess immediately. During the break, several board members approached Regina Higgins to ask for clarification on their personal exposure. They were worried about the financial consequences if the company's valuation collapsed due to a lawsuit. Regina explained that under the founding charter, the officers and directors had a strict duty to maintain compliance with all legacy agreements. If they failed to do so, they could face legal action from the shareholders. This explanation only increased their anxiety, and they began to discuss how they could resolve the situation without going to court. Preston tried to join the conversation, but they ignored him, leaving him standing alone in the hallway. The room was colder when they reconvened after the break. Preston came back late, carrying an iced drink and wearing sunglasses on his head as if he had just wandered in from a weekend resort. He was trying to project calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. Regina Higgins remained standing. The clause in question, Section 4.8 of the Operational Reversion Agreement, is valid, she announced. It was reaffirmed during the 2018 compliance cycle, certified by George Bancroft and 2 prior board members. One of the board members nodded slowly, realizing he had signed it years ago. Regina continued, explaining that the clause was designed to prevent unilateral termination of key legacy personnel without board review. If violated, it triggers a 96-hour reversion period. We are already 80 hours into that window. Preston rolled his eyes, claiming the clause was only symbolic. Regina did not back down. It is enforceable, she said. The severance terms were not met, and the board was not notified in writing prior to the termination. The Founders' Trust holds final authority in the event of a reversion. Preston sat up straight, asking if this was actually real. Regina opened a black folder showing the notarized execution notice signed by George and initialed by me. Unless we can produce an updated document, which I have confirmed does not exist, we are bound by what was filed. Preston stood up, pacing and calling it insane. Miriam turned to him, pointing out that he had fired someone with a direct connection to the founder without checking the paperwork. Preston demanded to know why legal had not warned him sooner. Regina replied that she had emailed him a week before the termination suggesting a document audit, but he had replied with a simple emoji. Miriam asked what would happen if the clock ran out. Regina explained that the appointee listed in the trust would assume operational oversight, and George's written override would be required for any changes. Preston muttered that George could not even sign his name now. Regina's voice dropped. The founder was informed of the clause yesterday, she said. He was shown the notarized documents and the trust directive, and when he saw the name of the appointee, he smiled. Preston snapped, asking if they were letting a decision from years ago reset a large company because of sentimentality. Regina looked at him and said that while Preston had inherited a seat at the table, others had built it. There were only 12 hours left before the window closed. At exactly 8 o'clock on Thursday morning, the board gathered again. The courier arrived, delivering the final activation packet. Regina reviewed the documents and nodded to Miriam. "It is done," she said. "The chain of command has shifted. The board voted unanimously to enter the change into the governance record. Preston stood in the corner, shouting that they could not just hand over the keys. The door opened, and I walked in, wearing a dark suit. I walked to the head of the table and connected my flash drive to the port. A company-wide message populated the main dashboard, announcing a return to continuity and integrity. Security entered the room. Preston took a step back, realizing it was over. I handed him his separation agreement, already signed by the board. As he took it, looking defeated, I leaned in and told him quietly to consider this his final lesson. We are the true leaders who keep the gears turning when the arrogant bosses try to sweep us away. Thank you for listening to this corporate chess match. Remember to hit that subscribe button, or the office coffee pot might just run cold on your next shift. Following my assumption of operational control, the first order of business was to stabilize our relationship with our primary vendors. I immediately reinstated Bernard as the vice president of vendor relations, restoring the trust that had been built over 2 decades. Fiona was brought back to manage the payroll systems, correcting the errors that had accumulated during her brief absence. Rachel was returned to her role as the head of client onboarding, where her expertise was desperately needed to resolve the backlog of client complaints. The college fraternity brothers that Preston had hired were escorted from the building by security, their titles of Chief Strategy Architect and Head of Organizational Vibes officially dissolved. The company culture returned to one of professionalism and mutual respect, where performance was valued over empty terminology. The board members, realizing that they had narrowly avoided a disastrous legal crisis, cooperated fully with the new management, ensuring that all corporate decisions were made in compliance with the founding charter. We scheduled a series of audits to review all financial and operational decisions made during Preston's short tenure, ensuring that any other errors were identified and corrected. I knew that the road ahead would require hard work, but I was confident that we could rebuild the company's strength and secure its future. The era of empty promises and buzzwords was over, and the era of real operations had returned.